Okay, so we'll get cracking then. So today we're talking about leg length difference and how and if that causes all the injuries that people seem to put it down to. It seems to be one of the main factors that people seem to think about is leg length difference being a cause of running related injuries. So we're just going to go through and have a look about whether it's really as big an issue as people seem to think it is. And if it is an issue, what we can do to try and resolve it and fix it and stop it from being an issue. So right, let's get started. So I'm going to just whip up my screen here. Again, if anybody's got any questions, then please fire away as we're going. And if I shared my screen there, that's not looking normal.
No, you haven't, not yet.
No, oh, I've just gone into my. Oh, what am I doing? There we go, screen share.
There we go.
Okay, so come on, up you come. So limb length discrepancy. This is what people seem to think we look like with a limb length discrepancy. People start thinking that you've got one limb shorter, therefore your pelvis goes out to the side, your leg turns in, your foot pronates on the long side, or you hold the short foot into a supinated position, and then the pelvis goes squiggly do too. Quite frankly, I'm not too convinced on a lot of those things. I think a lot of the research that's been done is quite indecisive on those factors and often show that it's the other way around in some limbs, and in a lot of people then they have one foot slightly supinated and one foot slightly more pronated and one limb slightly turned in or out anyway, regardless of whether their limbs are of equal or unequal length. So generally I don't think that is too major an issue. But before we get started too much on that, I just want to go through on some of the different types of limb lengths that we can have, because each different type is going to affect people differently with the way that they sort of compensate for it. So the first type that we have is this one here, structural. This is where there is an actual a bone is actually shorter on the left side or the right side compared to the other side. So it's usually the tibia, the shin bone, or the femur is shorter on one side than the other, or it could be both are shorter. So a structural one is where there's an actual structure within the body that is causing a limb length difference. The next type is a functional limb length difference. Now this is where all the bones are of equal length, but for some reason, when the person stood up, one limb ends up longer than the other limb. This is usually due to altered mechanics of the lower extremity. So you can have arthritic changes. So someone's got a very arthritic knee, their knee might not be able to straighten up properly, and that will make that limb shorter. They may also have weaker muscles on one side which prevent the leg from straightening out properly, or they may have had some sort of injury to the foot, which means that the foot pronates more on one side. So it's something to do with the mechanics of the body which is causing the limb to be shorter rather than an actual bony difference. Okay, so that's the two main types of limb length difference. We can then break those down into two further sections. So we've got acquired limb length difference. This is something that happens throughout life. It's usually caused by something like a fracture or a joint replacement. So it's something that somebody has developed, either a functional or a structural limb length difference at some point throughout their adult life. And a congenital limb length difference is something that you've had since childhood. So basically you've grown up with either a functional or a structural difference in your limb length, and that's just how your body has formed. with a difference in limb length. Okay, so we've got 27 people looking, got the big numbers in today. Okay, let's move on. Hope everyone's happy with that one. So some of the biomechanical theories that surround limb length difference and injuries. So tissue stress theory, if you want to read the full paper on tissue stress theory where it first came up to, it's down here at the bottom. It's definitely worth having a read of this paper because it makes up stuff like the foundations for a lot of injury related topics. The tissue stress theory basically if we change the forces that the body is subjected to, then the tissues within the body are going to adapt and change, and we can predict quite well how those tissues are going to change. So if we start adding more impact to bone, then bone is going to become denser and stronger. If we add more tensile load to tendon, then tendon is going to become stronger and more resilient. And if we start subjecting muscles to more strain and more load, then the muscles are going to again become stronger. And if we reduce any of those stresses on the body, then the body is going to atrophy. Those tissues are going to get thinner and weaker and make the body more subject to injury. So subjecting the body to different stresses, then we can determine how the body is going to adapt and change to those stresses. And tissue stress theory is basically built on something called Wolff's law and Davis's law. So Wolff's law states that bone in a healthy person or animal will adapt to the loads that it's placed on, and Davis's law is pretty much the same thing, saying soft tissue within the body is going to adapt to the imposed demands. And if we look at how old these theories are, 1867, and Wolff's law sometime between 1836 and 1902, then we're quite sure of how those theories work. Okay, so any forces that the body's subjected to, it's going to adapt and get used to. So if we go back to this screen here, if somebody has had a congenital limb length difference, so they've had it all their life, then it's quite likely that their body is adapted to that limb length difference. The bones will be strong, the muscles will be strong, and everything will have adapted to that person having a limb length difference. So my main argument is if somebody's had it since childhood, it's unlikely that it's going to be an issue for them when they're older, unless it's a huge big difference. And if it's acquired, something that's happened later on in life, if they've broken a bone or had a joint replacement, then the body isn't going to be quite as adapted as it would have been if they'd had that limb length difference from birth. So it's quite likely if it's acquired, then it's going to be more of an issue. If it's congenital, then it's going to be less of an issue in later life. Okay, moving on from the biomechanical arguments around it. So we've got problems associated with limb length difference. These are some of the major things that people say are linked with. Nick, do you want to add anything to that whilst we've got this?
Well, to the problems that I think it goes back to if someone has got a leg length and they've had it the majority of their life, if you then go and correct it in inverted commas, I think you run the risk of then actually creating someone's symptoms, because you've already said the body's adapted, it's used to that way of functioning. And if someone's had that leg length the majority of their life, the odds of it then, say 30, 40 years, then giving them symptoms later on, it is pretty slim. And my opinion sort of fits with yours, is that the majority of the time when you see a leg length, it's not actually related. So I don't sort of routinely measure for it on every single patient I see now. And going back to your first slide about that mechanism of compensation, I've got 3D gait data that shows that every person responds absolutely differently. So I could show you somebody who has had a leg length difference of about 2 to 3 centimeters, so quite significant. On that short side, their foot still everts, aka pronates, are at the rib foot, and that knee is still flexing on even on the short side. So not everyone compensates, and not everyone compensates in the same way. I think it's the old scenario of we are reliably unreliable as human beings. So we can't sort of assume everyone is going to do the same.
Yeah, I think it becomes we're reliably unreliable. Everybody moves differently when we're not injured or when we are injured as well. So we can't really determine what type of injury somebody's going to pick up by looking at the way they're moving. Yeah. So yeah, go on.
We then have it about the sort of measuring of leg length discrepancy. That's interesting as well. My thoughts are the only true way to measure is a weight-bearing full limb X-ray if you truly want to measure. Radiography is definitely the gold standard. There are clinical ways of measuring it, but yeah, to get an accurate measurement at all, then so a lot of people use tape measures, but I think with the tape measures, I think there is we can be inaccurate more than the difference the leg length is. I think I remember reading something at some point saying that your measurement can be out by sort of 1-2 centimeters when using a tape measure. Well, the majority of people have a leg length discrepancy. That difference isn't that big anyway. So our degrees of error is bigger than someone's difference would be in the first place. And I think that's the sort of, and then you can then sort of use blocks, and then that relies on you palpating the ASIS and then using our eyes to physically look as to whether that's level. And again, that's full of inaccuracies.
Yeah, I've got some statistics actually here of some clinical measurement inaccuracies. So there's one study done that showed 2 testers. I'll try and read my own writing here. Were 5 millimeters off radiographs, and only in 16 out of they're basically two testers. They measured 60 people's limb length difference. Out of 60 people, there were only 16 where 2 people were within 5 millimeters of getting the same measurement.
Yeah.
Compared to the radiographs. So the radiographs were very accurate. They're like the gold standard, and there were only 16 subjects that the 2 testers were able to get within 5 millimeters of the radiographs. So there's quite a huge error there. There's another study done by Mann. So when we're looking in the clinic, we're actually looking for the bony landmarks. I won't grab the skeleton down, but the 2 knobbly parts on the front of the pelvis. Mann found there's very poor reliability of determining even the iliac crest height of somebody. So we couldn't even determine the iliac crest height with a very prominent bony landmark, and people weren't even able to reliably find that, let alone try and find it enough to measure. Yeah,
and I think that's the big issue. Don't get me wrong, you are going to get, for me, I think as a general rule of thumb, for a leg length to be significant in the majority of people, it's got to be greater than sort of that 2 centimeter mark, is my personal view.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, you are going to find some patients where it can be slightly less than that, and it's going to be symptomatic. But for me, I always go through all the other options first of making them stronger, making sure everything else is where we want it to be, rather than just shoving a heel raise in there. And Katrina, we'll come back to your question in a bit. And then if we then chat about treatment of leg length from a sort of podiatrist, perspective is we just use a heel raise, or do we use a whole sole raise? Personally, I always will try, and if we're talking a difference greater than 2 centimeters, trying to fit that in a shoe's a nightmare anyway. I think mechanically, if you just put someone a heel raise on one side, you're then going to get more hip flexion, knee flexion on that side, and possibly could you make matters worse elsewhere. I personally think raising the sole is a better option, whether you can do that internally or whether you got to do that externally. I think from a mechanical aspect, that's better. But again, that has its downsides. Well, it increases weight, so you get one shoe that's heavier than the other. We sort of have a joke with patients and clients saying what you're doing is you may end up walking around in circles. You've got one shoe that will rotate in one leg because it's heavier. And then if you're a runner and then you've got a whole sole raise, you're then going to make one shoe much stiffer than the other shoe. So it's going to feel, so there are pros and cons of each. Using the heel raise is easy. You just slip it in and out of your different shoes. But then also, if you then look at the amount I sort of correct as well, it's actually, did I just say that word correct? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that word. The amount I will put in as a rule of thumb is if someone's got a 2 centimeter difference, I will often find that their magic number will be about 50% less than that, especially if they've lived with it for a long time. If they've got a 2 centimeter difference, you're never going to put a 20 mil heel raise in, because they're so used to walking around with that difference. If you go and correct it to the full amount that I've measured it in clinic, and most probably measured it inaccurately and wrongly and not given its true difference, if you then go stick a heel raise in or a sole raise that's that complete difference, experience tells me they just don't like that at all.
Yeah, that then links back to this tissue stress theory. As if we change something, then we're changing the forces that are going to be acting on that body. The impact, the ground reaction forces are going to travel through the body differently, and then we're going to make them more prone to different injuries. So we might be trying to relieve symptoms in one area, but then we're going to definitely open them up for different injuries elsewhere. So, and
maybe that's a good tune. I said 21-year-old male has a leg length discrepancy at his age. Would it be advisable to correct? To me, it all depends on, are the symptoms we think definitely related to the leg length, and what is the size of the leg length. So I've had friends who have had a significant leg length discrepancy from birth, and we're talking sort of 2-3 centimeters, and they physically surgically had bones lengthened whilst they were growing to correct that difference. And if you really want to correct a significant leg length, surely that's the only true option, which is really too drastic for the majority of patients. So the odds are, if you're a 21-year-old male, unless it's a massive, great big difference, the odds are I don't think it will be related. It may be, but I think the odds are, from my experience, is that it won't be related, especially if they're active. And me and Andrew having this discussion, fine, if you're a runner, how many legs do you land on? One. And as Andrew also pointed out to me, is that, well, if you run off road, the position where you land is different every single time. The difference in the terrain height is different. So it's I think it's one of these things that for our society we've got fixated on. We've got a leg length, we must always correct it, and it must be related.
We've got a big thing about posture, and posture must be, there's some sort of perfect posture, but posture isn't something that causes injury. It doesn't cause pain. You can be sat at a desk, shoulders back vertically upright, and absolute perfect posture, and you're still going to pick up injuries and pain. Posture's not really a thing that causes injuries. So it's the same with leg length difference. If you've got one leg different in your pelvis is slightly out, it really doesn't matter if your body's used to that and adapted to it. It's normal for your body.
And then in clinic, then how would you then try to assess the difference between a functional or structural leg length?
Well, that comes from the history. So it's functional and
structural.
Structural. Okay, yeah, a lot of it comes from the history and observation of them as well, if it's in clinic. So yeah, the only way you can really tell is to whip out the tape measure and measure the length of the femur and tibia. Like we've been saying, there's huge margin of error of being able to do that.
And do you ever get someone laying down on their back, look at the leg length, and then get them to sit up, then see if there's any change?
That's generally not something I do. I generally look at them if they're in the clinic, then standing up.
Yeah,
looking at the way they're standing, because there's so many different variables that you can have in people lying down. You can do it quite easily at home. If somebody's lying down, they can just move their legs slightly from one side to the other. Then it can make a huge leg length difference appear. So yeah, a leg length difference is definitely something that's very easy to find if you want to go looking for it. But yeah.
And then if you found one in clinic and then you thought, okay, no, this may be significant, like how does it interest your treatment rationale for it? How do you go about and find out what number is their magical number?
It's just eyeballing it. Basically, I find that's the best way in the clinic. So we have them sort of stood up, and then we just put blocks underneath their feet. We look visually at the pelvis, whether it's high or low on one side, and look at the shoulders. But they give sort of verbal feedback as well, saying whether they feel like they're being pushed over to the side or not, or whether they're feeling more balanced or lopsided. But it's so rare though that I really have to deal much with leg length difference. A lot of it will come from people with hip and knee replacements rather than.
Yeah, that's my biggest sort of cohort of it is post hip replacement, and even then I'll do the same as you. I've got blocks and I'll visualize, but I mainly go on patients' feedback on their perception of how they feel. That's my biggest deciding factor on how much I use correction, different like raise wise, as it were.
As soon as they say they're feeling balanced and sort of like secure, then we can put something inside the shoe temporarily and let them have a walk around and see if that's comfortable for them. Crutchley, what are you on about? Pelvic inclinometer, just saying.
I'll let you answer that one.
Okay, so the pelvic inclinometer. Pelvic inclinometer is digital things which measure the angle of the pelvis. It's been around for a long time, a lot longer than some people like to think they have been. They're just not accurate in giving us any information, and even if they were accurate in giving any information, is that information even needed? And there was a study done testing the reliability of the digital pelvic inclinometer, and the data that the study came up with is quite different than what the conclusion of the study came up with. And so I think always it's just a big thing for making sure you're being critical of research and looking at the finer detail, because I think the conclusion said that it was very reliable. I can't remember the correct things, but the conclusion was saying it was very reliable. The data is saying it was less reliable than a 50-50 guess. So
I completely agree with that. I think so pelvis and hip, the big joints, they can tolerate a lot and compensate for a lot, and I don't use one in clinic.
No, I wouldn't. It just, but then we have to look, even if the pelvis is slightly out of balance, then what does that matter anyway? So even if the digital pelvic inclinometer was accurate and could tell us that, what difference?
Well, it goes back to the old saying that we always harp on about: you treat the patient, not the scan. If you did scan everyone's leg length, you had everyone that come in, and there is a facility in London. I don't know if it's still up and running, obviously prior to COVID, but you could go send people there and get their leg length measured. And I thought, well, if you've done that with everyone, the odds are you're going to find a difference in the majority of the population, I would imagine.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that that's related to past, previous, or future injuries. And a lot of the research is sort of retrospective stuff. It's not done. It's done on previous injuries with that data. It's not done on injuries that occurred in the future. And as we've already discussed over all these talks, is that when you look at injury risk, it's so multifactorial. To pin it down to one thing you're never going to do it. It's always a sort of compilation of loads of things put together. So trying to turn around and say, oh well, it's going to be leg length that's caused all of this. I just don't. I struggle with the concept of it, and don't get me wrong, there are times in clinics where actually the leg length problem that has you've treated that aspect and that has solved all those patient symptoms. But I could most probably count on two hands the amount of time that has happened compared to the number of patients I've seen throughout my career. And most of the times it does happen. It's the most recent one was an older gentleman who had a leg length discrepancy his whole life, but then unfortunately developed Parkinson's, and then was then finding that actually it was then the leg length was more of a balance issue rather than a pain issue for him, just because of the Parkinson's that that come on through. So yeah, it's one of those, again, it can almost go into that sort of room 101, as it were, as all these other things that need to be sort of just put in there and just sort of not worried about as much. That can go in there, like overpronation can go in there as well.
Yeah,
metatarsalgia can go in there as well.
Yeah, I think if somebody's had a limb length difference their entire life, they've been running a high mileage for many years. Say it's the age of 20 up to 35, they've been running high mileage. At the age of 35, they're still running the same mileage per week, but they're just changing the type of running that they're doing. Then all of a sudden they pick up an injury. If they go to the clinic and they find a leg length difference, it's not that leg length difference that's caused the injury. They've had that injury all their life. They've been doing high mileage and running hard, but it's the change of training that they've done which will be responsible for the injury, not the leg length difference.
That comes on to a nice another point, actually. And also Katrina asked, Oscar Slatus, would this cause leg length discrepancy? No, not my opinion. Wouldn't do. It's the people. Okay, well, we know from a medical viewpoint that, and an evidence viewpoint, sorry, is that the majority of leg length discrepancies aren't related to someone's pain and symptoms. However, when you then look at public's perception around leg length discrepancy, that there's still this big ethos thinking of everything functioning on mechanical and everything being nice in alignment and everything being straight. And there are still colleagues of ours still talking about that. There are still different healthcare practitioners speaking about it. So no wonder it's confusing for the public, is that we still haven't got everything in order in the medical world. Unfortunately with this. And I think, it doesn't help when people's perceptions and thoughts and beliefs around leg length discrepancy, that if you've got a leg length discrepancy, it is always going to be related to my problem. And most of the time it's not. And that's the one thing we've sort of found with the Run 3D, is that people have this sort of structural leg length discrepancy, and then when we get them running and I show them the data, I can say, look, there is no evidence here that you are compensating for a leg length discrepancy or anything along those lines. And sometimes I found that's helped, and just people get over this this sort of fears and beliefs. But it is, I think we have to try and not step away from the mechanical mindset completely, but we've got to be aware of everything else that's going on as well. And it's tarsal tunnel. Could leg length discrepancy cause a tarsal tunnel? I wouldn't say it would cause a tarsal tunnel. I think it could possibly aggravate a tarsal tunnel. But again, for me, it's got to be a fairly great big leg length discrepancy to start giving me foot and ankle related symptoms. For me personally, by the time, if you've got this difference in around the femur region or something, by the time you've then gone through the hip, the knee, and then get to the foot, and you're still then getting symptoms there, I'm not overly convinced, if I'm honest.
Yeah, let's have a look at some of the evidence. So let's just get a screen. So I've got the sun shining on the screen, so I can't see what I'm looking at. Next. Yeah, so these are some of the problems that are often associated with limb length differences, pain and arthritic changes. We'll come and look at some of the evidence in a second for that. Lumbosacral facet joint angles. Again, this is looking at joint angles rather than actual comparing whether somebody has pain or not. So just because somebody is sort of out of an alignment doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to have pain. Pelvic tilt, again, this is posture and position. It's not an issue unless it's painful, but a lot of the research looks at these different alignments and things which aren't an issue.
So is this why then there is this disconnect then between the public and, because a lot of the research, if you look at all those, apart from pain, arthritic changes and altered forces, everything on there else is near enough looking at the mechanical effects of leg length discrepancy. So if a lot of the research are just speaking about the mechanical effects, and that's what's been put out there, is that why then actually a lot of the conversations are around about
I think quite likely, because they find like there's an increased postural sway or an increased pelvic tilt in somebody with a limb length difference, and that's sort of like their big findings. That gets sort of hyped up, but the problem is how much of a problem is pelvic tilt, how much of a difference is an asymmetrical stance times or postural sway. How is that actually a problem? And that's what a lot of the
I can tell you from all of the 3D data I've done, it would be more abnormal to have symmetry than it would be to have asymmetry. So I see people who are more asymmetrical all the time. Now, don't forget, I am only looking at people who have pain and symptoms. I'm not looking at a pain-free population. So the data I have and the data I see, you always have to take into consideration that I'm only seeing people with symptoms. So if we assess a load of pain-free people, I may find there be much more symmetry. But again, I think we have this illusion of symmetry, which, I think is sort of another thing that we don't need to strive towards.
Yeah, you just have to just walk down the street and look at people's faces, and nobody's face is perfectly symmetrical, is it? So it doesn't mean they've got a bad face. Same with postures. You don't just because somebody's just slightly lopsided in one way doesn't mean it's bad posture. It's just what their body is used to and adapted to. That's just normal for them. But if we look at some of these other things here, increased kinetic energy during walking, it's increased oxygen consumption during submaximal running. So it's looking at the running economy. A lot of these studies are done by artificially making a leg length difference. So they build up one shoe in the study, and so they get people with equal limbs, then they put them on a shoe with a heel raise in or a built-up sole to sort of artificially make a limb length difference, and then they measure their oxygen consumption with the special shoe on, without the special shoe on, and compare the difference. Well, of course, somebody that's not used to running with a limb length difference is probably going to have an increased oxygen consumption. We can do that in the gym quite easy, just by telling somebody to hold their arms still when they're running. It's going to increase their oxygen consumption. So these tests that are done with sort of like artificially induced limb length differences, where people don't have enough time to adapt to them, are going to cause results like that. So we have to be cautious with those. So
because I would argue then what would be interesting is for them to look at that data and then actually find some runners with physical limb length differences with the same as what they use in those studies, and then see is there an OT consumption difference. Because I think that actually, if you found, my view, and I may be wrong, is that actually if you found someone who's lived with that leg length difference their whole life, and you looked at O2 consumption, I don't think it will be increased compared to someone that hasn't got a leg length, because that's what they know with, that's what they've lived with, that's what they've adapted to. So Katrina also says leg length and tendinopathy. Again, no, I don't think so. It may be a small contributing factor, but if you're looking at tendons, there are whole other reasons as to why you got a tendinopathy, and I wouldn't be thinking of leg length, and nowhere near the top of my list, unless it's a whacking great big sort of 3 centimeter to 3 centimeter leg length. And Simon does raise a good point: consult, not examine, and you'll find more answers. As me and Andrew have both always said, it's everything's in the history, and then anatomy, then a bit more history.
Yeah. Testing is only there to confirm a diagnosis, basically. You get 90% of your diagnosis, I think, from the history rather than from measuring and testing. Testing is there to rule things out and to confirm. So yeah, going back to the research. So yeah, these some of the common flaws found in the research around leg length difference. So it's artificially making a leg length difference, then measuring the outcomes such as oxygen consumption and sway, assessing posture and joint angles rather than assessing what's actually wrong with the person. It doesn't matter if they've got a slightly more increased lordosis than what the textbook says. Retrospectively measuring limb length of people in pain with arthritis. So a couple of studies I was looking at today, they were looking at people with arthritis, and then they were measuring the limb length of those people, and basically seeing who had the biggest limb length difference. So yes, basically they were looking at people with problems, then trying to find an answer for the problem. So retrospective studies are useful, but they don't tell us if a limb length difference has caused the arthritis. We just know the people with the arthritis have a limb length difference. And other studies that have been done looking at older people show that arthritis correlates well with age. So the older you are, and the more chances you have of having arthritis, whether or not you have a limb length difference. Yeah, and as we've already said, assessing gait asymmetry or ground reaction forces. So a lot of the gait asymmetry studies on the runners are done by measuring ground reaction forces rather than the kinematics. Without taking into account any pain or injury history. So we do know with we'll look at some of the studies in a second ago. Yeah, that answers that a bit more. And the method of measuring leg length difference, whether it's a direct measurement using radiography, which we said is the gold standard, or indirect measured with tape measure, which we said there's huge variation and unreliability with the measuring effect. So using a tape measure, as Nick points out, it's like a 20 millimeter variation. So if people are trying to detect the difference of less than one centimeter, then you're just wasting time because you can't do it accurately. Okay, so yeah, do you want to add anything more to that, Nick? Or
no, I think that sums up everything that we sort of discussed before this slide actually come up. So yeah, it's I think we just need to definitely move on from this. And I've said it, this mechanical sort of mindset when it comes to leg length discrepancy, because a lot of the research there are flaws in their methodology, and it's hard because talking about doing research is hopefully we're at the point where my research is about to get published. It's been through the peer review process, so hopefully it's on the last bit of alterations that we need to make. And it is hard work doing research. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. And it can't be the nicest thing when someone turns around and says your research, that there's some big flaws in there, but it is what it is. We can only take from that that we just need to learn and just try and resolve those flaws as we go forward. I think, as Simon already mentioned, that if we constantly go on and looking for this, you'll find it, because you'll get that mindset, I must look for it, I must look for it, I must look for it. Okay, I'll find it every time, because that's the mindset that you're you're in, really. So yeah, I think that's all the extra I wanted to add.
Yeah. Okay. Let's. So I've got some bits and pieces from some studies. So the last big review paper. So review papers gather all the available information, and that then sort of tells all about that information. So the last big review that was done on limb length difference that I could find was in 2002. So it's quite old now, that one. There's been some others looking at specific parts of limb length difference. There's one in 2017 looking at gait asymmetry in limb length difference. But the last big one, we're looking at a whole load of different attributes of limb length difference back in 2002. So I'll just go through some of the findings that they came up with. It's quite a common problem, and as many as 40 to 70% of the population have a limb length difference. It's a debate as to what's considered a worthwhile limb length difference. So a lot of the studies seem to class 2 centimetre difference to be a significant difference. Others say it's a lot bigger. Others say it's smaller, but 2 centimetres is generally what it boils down to. And there's a huge debate about whether the limb length difference has an effect on the musculoskeletal system. But I think, we can probably say it does have an effect on the musculoskeletal system, but whether that effect is a problem is a different matter. So looking at this one here from 2018, there's no relationship between mild limb length discrepancy and spine, hip or knee degenerative disease in a large cadaver collection. So cadavers are studies done on dead people, and on this one they had 576 cadavers, aged 56 plus minus 10 years, with an average limb length difference of 4.8 millimeters. And that they were quite accurate in measuring of this because they could accurately measure the difference in the bone length with tape measures, because obviously they were cadavers, so they could do that, which you can't do on a live person. So the average limb length difference wasn't that massive, being only 4.8 millimeters. So after screening, they added another 26 people with a greater than 10 millimeter difference. So they were looking at mild differences rather than big differences. And they found there was no effect of limb length difference with arthritis of the spine, hips and knees. So basically they couldn't tell which cadaver had a big limb, like a 10 millimeter difference in limb length, by looking at the quality of those people's joints. However, there was a strong correlation with age, and that pretty much goes through most joint degeneration studies, that it's all linked with age rather than the skeletal system. Females appear to be more protected against joint wear and tear than males. That's contradicts quite a few studies, I think that bit does. And African Americans seem to have greater knee arthritis, but it didn't matter whether it was a long limb or a short limb, or the limbs quite evenly. It didn't make any difference. Just African Americans seem to have more knee arthritis. So that sort of just shows that the long-term effect of a mild limb length difference doesn't really affect arthritic changes in the body of the spine, hips and knee.
Yeah, no, and I think Simon does raise a good point. As I mentioned earlier about the difference in different healthcare practitioners and how we treat this. Obviously, Simon's sort of saying is sort of chiropractors saying that, okay, no, we need to address this leg length discrepancy, and it is causing all your back pain. This isn't me having a dig at all at chiropractors. I work with a couple of very good ones. But that does, again, this is the issues that they've been to see other healthcare professionals who then told them that all their leg length is related to their problem. And then they then come see us and we're then telling them it's not. And then this poor patient is just then left confused in the middle. And it is, as Simon sort of said, it is just that practitioner bias. And And yeah, it's just for me, my ultimate dream would be is everyone could start singing off the same hymn sheet, as it were, especially when it comes to this, regardless if you're a physio, podiatrist, osteopath, chiropractor, it doesn't matter. That's what I would love, but I think I'm acutely aware that I'm in loud cuckoo land, I think.
If we're all evidence-based practitioners, we're all looking at the same evidence, and logically we should be drawing the same or similar conclusions.
Yeah, it's and I hadn't seen that cadaver paper. Yes, it is recording. I haven't seen that cadaver paper, and that just, I think it sums up nicely what we're saying, that there's quite a large number of sort of sample of the cadavers in that study, and actually then you're seeing from that leg length discrepancy from by the time someone passed away, when they looked at people's joint surface, and that didn't have any correlation to affecting. But then we also got to be careful. We know that structure, it doesn't always correlate with pain either as well. So unfortunately you can't measure when someone's a cadaver, when someone's passed away, so you can't you can only measure what is there. You can't ask them any questions, unfortunately. So
yeah, but what we can't draw from this paper is whether it increases injuries throughout life, and we can't say what happens if they have a greater limb length difference than 10 millimeters. So that's the limitation of that study. Next one then. This one was from 2017, so a few years old now. Gait asymmetry during 400 to 1,000 meters high intensity track running in relation to injury history. So in this paper, they were looking at quite fairly elite club runners running 400 meters. That's one go around the track to 1,000 meters, all track based athletes. They were looking at previously injured runners and non-injured runners, and they were measuring the gait asymmetry. So previous injured runners had greater asymmetry than the non-injured runners, and gait asymmetry of athletes. So this second bullet point came directly from the conclusion, because I couldn't word it any differently. So the gait asymmetry of athletes with a previous history of injury was significantly greater than that of athletes without previous injury. However, this injury related to enlarged asymmetry was detectable only at 400 meters, but not at longer distances for 600 and 1,000 meters. So these gait asymmetries, that they could only find a difference at shorter distances. So if we're looking at people running more than 400 meters, then these gait asymmetries are less applicable to them. They measured the ground contact time, so they weren't measuring arm swing or how the legs turn in or out. They were just measuring how long the foot was on the floor for. And ground contact time increased with bend running on the left, which is normal. That's what we'd expect to see from somebody running round the bend. That's the left foot, the inside foot would be on the ground for longer. So that's quite normal. So these people running 400 meters, which is one go around the track, we would expect to see a big asymmetry in those runners. It's just quite normal. So the conclusion from that paper was that the asymmetry is normal and natural.
Which you would definitely think that in a track runner who's running around bends.
Yeah, and the main thing with this paper, I put this one in to show that the asymmetry is normal, whether somebody has a limb length difference or not, because this paper wasn't looking at limb length difference as such. It was just comparing asymmetry in injured and non-injured. So we would expect people to be asymmetrical, and it'd be, yeah, as Nick was saying earlier, it'd be more of a shock if somebody came out and they had very symmetrical legs.
Yeah. Oh yeah, from hip down to ankle, if they were completely symmetrical, I'd be surprised. I haven't seen it yet in any of my 3D testing that I've been doing for 5, I can't remember how long, 4 years now.
Yeah. Okay, I can't remember how many more papers I've got. I think it's just one more. So this one, leg length inequality and running related injury amongst high school runners from 2018. They found that this was high school, so it's boys rather than men, and girls rather than women. So I know some people get offended by this one, but this is looking at boys and girls rather than adults. So boys with a limb length difference greater than 1 centimetre had more injuries, but they couldn't, it didn't matter whether it was on the short limb or the long limb, the injuries were quite equal to both the long and the short limb. The girls with leg length difference of greater than 1.5 centimetres, there's no difference in injury rates for those. And boys and girls with a leg length difference of between 0.5 centimetre and 1.5 centimetres had no difference in injury rates. During this study, they were defining an injury as missing 1 training event or one competition, which could be, it's quite a lax way of defining injury. It's quite huge. What was your definition from last week, Nick? You had missing 1 week of
1 week's worth of activity. Yeah, that's quite a missing 1 training event or 1 competition, and that defines a running related injury. That's quite a low threshold. I think for me it has to be the minimum sort of 5 days. You got to miss 5 days worth of activity before you in my eyes. I can't remember what the exact, but I think it was like 5 days for a week that now we've sort of a Delphi study sort of that they come to the conclusion that's what we should determine a running related injury as when we're doing literature and when we're doing research and whatnot. So
missing 1 event, it's like if you had a hard session on Wednesday and then you're supposed to have another training session on Thursday, but you just didn't feel up to it, then that'd be counted as an injury. So yeah, it doesn't really, it's not really that accurate for me.
And it also goes on, it sort of said they're using a tape measure. Animals, we know that they were looking at 1.5 centimetres or greater. Well, if we know the tape measure can have inaccuracies of up to 2 centimetres, then there's another issue straight away.
Positives and for problems there. So yeah, you can't really take too much from this because I think there's lots of flaws. But the only thing that it does really show is if there's the greater the difference is, then the more chances of getting injured. Which, going back to the 2002 review paper, is something that paper points out, is that the greater the difference, then the more chances are. But most of other studies are saying from 2 centimetres onwards is when we start getting issues. Okay, so just to sum things up, gait asymmetry is normal and natural. Mild limb length difference, sort of less than 2 centimetres, probably doesn't increase risk of arthritis. Acquired leg length differences are more problematic than congenital, so people that have had it all their life are less likely to have a problem with it than somebody that picks it up later on from a break or a joint replacement. Greater limb length difference is a greater likelihood of injury, but what the actual difference needs to be in order to make that increase that risk of injury is probably quite big. There is some evidence that that limb length difference causes lower back problems, but it's not great, and there's nothing really done in the last 10 years I could find that could support that. And there's little evidence for causing running related injuries unless limb length difference is greater than 1.5 centimetres, and even then it's still mild until it's way over 2 centimetre difference.
Yeah, if you want to look at lower back problems, person I have a chat to, I have a read of her work is Dr. Lindsay Hill, another podiatrist up north. Her PhD, I believe, was around lower back problems, and for which leg length I should imagine she would have looked into that. And I believe, top of my head, is there is some evidence, but the evidence is really sparse and lacking. So I wouldn't definitely be jumping to the conclusion of if you've got a leg length discrepancy, that's what's causing your lower back pain, because the odds are it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, so what time are we on now?
Sure, that conclusion slide is not too bad. There's like 3 minutes to go. That's almost like
timed it right.
It's almost like we sit there and we plan and we discuss how we're going to do things. It's sort of a
yeah, we plan. Yeah, this is what we do, though, isn't it? We sort of plan it and really rehearse it well, don't we? And then it just sort of ends up that way. What's that? Sorry.
It is more people, I thought, than we're going to watch than we were for the bank holiday weekend. That's had nice weather and.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting so many people for such a good day.
No.
Right, then. So I think we'll end it there. Where's my? I can't see my screen. Right, see you around, guys.
Adios. See you later, guys.